sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. And as I mentioned, I was in this room earlier last week celebrating the 50th anniversary of our American Indian Studies program here at KW-Madison. And so it's with great pride that I read that statement. Okay, we're ready. There we go. Got it. I also want to be sure to thank our many sponsors of the Wisconsin Science Festival who make this event possible. And I'd like to add free to tens of thousands of people who have been and are still participating in more than 300 events statewide this week. I think it's more than that. It's a lot more than that. The Wisconsin Science Festival is happening across the state in communities in every part of the great state of Wisconsin. And so it's a great event. This year does mark the 12th edition. The 12th edition of the statewide event, and the first time it is being held for a full week. You can find out a lot more about the remaining events at wisconsinsciencefest.org. So there are still lots of events happening around town. One that I am really excited about is our Science on the Square, which coincides with the Madison Night Market. This is a fantastic event. There will be dozens of hands-on science activities sharing State Street and the downtown Capitol area with the Madison Night Market, coinciding with some pretty stellar events. I'm an astronomer, by the way. You probably all got that. At the Wisconsin Book Festival. In fact, for those of you that are interested, I will be at the downtown library tomorrow evening interviewing Andy Weir about his new book, Project Hail Mary. And then on Saturday night, right here in the Discovery Building, we'll be holding the annual Wisconsin Science Festival Expo from 10 to 1. This is an amazing family fun event. And so I hope to see you and your families out here on Saturday. So this is a great week for science. We have a great evening in store for you tonight, beginning with some very special VIP guests who are here to talk about what this week means for Wisconsin. I'd like to begin by welcoming Wisconsin DNR Secretary Preston Cole to say a few words.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. I just finished up a conversation with Sea Grant. Sea Grant are researchers for the university system. And so we are, at the DNR, we are literally science in motion. And so we have a ton of opportunities to work with researchers in a myriad of ways. And so I represent 3,100 employees at the department and certainly serve at the will of Governor Evers. And since we've landed, we continue to talk about clean drinking water. That was one of the first things that jumped off the page as it relates to what resonated across the state of Wisconsin that's tied to our economy. And here's the hook. We have a $24 billion tourism business and outdoor recreation in the state of Wisconsin. That consumer lift is money spent when people go hiking and biking on our trails, third in the country in terms of out-of-state fishing licenses. 49 state parks, 15 state forests, 44 state trails, 84,000 miles of shoreline. And we live in an island, and so with Lake Michigan on one side, just Lake Superior on the other side, and of course the Mississippi River. So we're tied to this economy about outdoor recreation. People drop a lot of money in the state of Wisconsin because we have something very special here, but something so special that we have to pay attention to the ecosystem. And so we count on researchers, or certainly science-based research from folks from WICI, which is the Wisconsin Institute of Climate Change Initiatives. And they're telling us our cold water streams are 2 to 3 degrees warmer now than they were 10 years ago. And what that means on the western side of the state, if you're fishing for trout, that habitat is changing. Those cold water fish need cold water. So because of climate change, what does it put at stake? Our outdoor recreation economy. And so we, again, our science in motion, and what that means that fisheries biologists, meteorologists, university systems give us the guidance necessary around our ecosystem. Moreover, what's important for us to really hone in on is the implication of PFAS in our drinking water. Will people come here? Lead laterals, emerging contaminants, legacy contaminants, and quite frankly, arsenic that is natural to our systems, burgeoning up in places that we don't want. Will people continue to drive that $24 billion consumer lift around outdoor recreation if, when they visit here, they can't drink the water? They go up north, Highway 29 or Highway 2, and they can't drink the water. Marinette, Pestigo, Starkweather Creek, Madison Chain, Milwaukee, Lacrosse, Eau Claire, PFAS in the drinking water. So the connections we make using science, finding out where PFAS is and where it isn't. If you didn't know, PFAS is certainly a contaminant, comes from firefighting foam. So I'll be up with the Secretary of Agriculture on Monday. So we're putting a ton of money in collecting all this firefighting foam that still exists in fire departments because that's what they train on. And so we're pulling that chemical out of firehouses across the state of Wisconsin. And if you didn't know, firefighting foam is very good at snuffing out planes that are on fire. So good that it was used not only in the state of Wisconsin, but across the world. Now we know better. Now we begin in earnest to clean up systems, that these legacy systems, whether it's our outdoor economy or the cities, towns, and villages that people count on clean water. We literally want to give people surety that when you turn on that tap, you will have fresh, clean drinking water. Something that many of us take for granted. But I'm here to tell you folks, there are communities that I just ticked off that are upside down as it relates to PFAS and drinking water. And none of this can happen alone for the DNR. Again, as I continue to say, science in action, that we count on scientists to let us know where it is and where it isn't. Public health officials that talk about how many parts per trillion can harm us. What does it mean for babies, reproductive systems? And so people who created this probably had the best intentions because it is in every sense of the word, from things that make us surfaces slick, like your pans that we use today. I remember the pan that I had in college had so much, Teflon depleted from it. I'm sure there's some PFAS in this body somewhere, either that or cold beer. It's like at any particular time, if you golf or spend time outdoors at, your rain gear, check the label. And so these are the kinds of chemicals that people believe that will move mankind forward. And of course, we all know that at this point. So we're beginning to pull some of that stuff out of our systems. And again, every day our staff of scientists are busy studying wildlife, researching pollutants on the landscape, and regulating industrial and agricultural users around our natural resources. Our wildlife biologists work to ensure Wisconsin maintains our status as a conservation destination. Forestry, fisheries, wildlife, getting in the outdoors is a big deal for us in the state of Wisconsin. Why? Because, quite frankly, we have something, as I said earlier, very special here in Wisconsin. Raise your hand if you're from Wisconsin. Awesome, thank you. Our water and air scientists ensure that the water we drink and the air we breathe are safe for health for everyone, including all the creatures great and small. Again, these chemicals bioaccumulate. Health advisories on fish from Starkweather Creek in our Madison chain. So airports or lake systems that are downstream from airports, when it rains, it catches all of that PFAS and works its way into our groundwater system and our surface drain. That's why we have these health standards now on Starkweather Creek, but also in our Madison chain. Under the Evers administration and the governor's strong leadership, Wisconsin is working to tackle climate change, focus on environmental justice, and maintain and enhance our state's parks and many of our natural areas. While the challenges we face are many, the DNR has a staff that are knowledgeable to meet these challenges head on. One of the things I'm most proud of is our agency's commitment to teaching and mentoring young people about nature and science. For example, in Milwaukee, our state's only urban forest, Haven Woods, in our most diverse city, is a place that we can turn that gene on and being in the outdoors, understanding ecosystems, toiling in the soil. How did I get into this business? Tadpoles. Damn tadpoles. Right? So my brother sticks my hand in the water and like crawly things all over. I'm like, oh my, get my hand out of it, right? He goes, these are gonna be, frogs. Not too distant time. Get out of it, right? Future farmer of America, being in the outdoors, rural Michigan, led me on this path of natural resource management. Hey, so we all come to the game in very specific ways, but turning that light on for young boys and girls, specifically young boys and girls of color, is a big deal for us in the state of Wisconsin. One, we have to. Two, if you look around the room as it relates to scientists, as it relates to getting people into the outdoors, we're seriously lacking in women of color and people of color, literally, to pick up the charge, to carry the mantle forward around clean water, clean ecosystems, and what it's going to require in the future. So we're on it, and we make sure that at Haven Woods, we fling those doors wide open so young boys and girls can come and toil in the soil and one day have tadpole creepy crawlies on their arm and change their life. I started my career as a forester, and I appreciate the impact that trees and our forests have on fighting climate change and improving our urban tree canopy, reducing the heat island effect in our summers, and of course, providing thousands of opportunities for habitat for thousands of species. So I represent the governor on the 1trilliontree.org group, and we are hell-bent on planting 1 trillion trees between now and 2030. Our commitment is 75 million in the state of Wisconsin. We've already put in the ground 9.3 million over the last year. Not just us, our partners, our cooperators, U.S. Forest Service, County Forest Association, Wisconsin women owners, and homeowners in cities, towns, and villages. We're all counting because we know what trees do in terms of sucking up carbon. We know what trees do in reducing the heat island effect. Cows get it. Drive a country road when it's 100 degrees outside. That one single tree in the pasture. We're all the cows underneath that doggone tree, right? They get it. You multiply that over a forest, an entire forest, an entire urban forest, you begin to see the climate begin to, that heat island effect begin to dissipate, especially in areas where you see a lot of concrete.
Mr. Secretary?
Yes, ma'am.
We need to ask you to please curtail your remarks. We need to get on to the evening's event.
Okay, I didn't know where that voice came from. God, is that a voice from God? So, my responsibility is to make sure that Wisconsinites, and certainly folks in this room, pay attention to science and science in motion. To help move that needle forward. And on behalf of the Evers administration, our work is science in motion. My hope is that we can entice many other boys and girls, young professionals, folks in this room, no matter what your age, no matter your creed, and where you come from, we'd love to have you on. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Secretary Cole. It's now my pleasure to welcome Tom McCarthy, the Executive Manager from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. Tom.
I'm going to try to keep the voice and say, first and foremost, I am here on behalf of the State Superintendent, Dr. Jill Underly, She could not be here because she was using science to fix a tooth problem. So, it turns out that science benefits all of our lives. And I promise the secretary and I did not coordinate these particular remarks, but he hit on something that I really wanted to talk about and highlight, which is the idea of curiosity in science per your, the name of this little festival here that we were at, but also that idea that curiosity is genetic, right? And that everyone is born with it. But what I really want to leave you with is it's not necessarily purely genetic, right? All of us can point to the tadpole experience at some point in our careers that science in the K-12 field introduced us to and ignited that interest. I might go hang out with your dean later because for me, it was astronomy. It was learning about black holes. I can remember where I was in second grade when someone told me that this was a concept. And I went to the library and I picked up every stinking book that talked about stars. And I immersed myself in it for years. And I am now in a made-up title at the Department of Public Instruction. I manage people, right? That's basically what I do. I thought I wanted to be an engineer. I came to UW-Madison and I never left. But that curiosity that sparked in me continued regardless of whether I did science or not. So here I am standing to you trying to wrap up some comments very quickly, but to just remind you that that introduction and touch to science is what inspires creativity in all of our youth, and specifically in our youth of color. And when you look at the state, here's when I'm going to play a little pseudoscience with you. Our demographics of our schools tell us that as a leading indicator, our population is changing. It's becoming more diverse. And yet we have some of the largest gaps between our white students and our students who experience some sort of disadvantage. And frankly, that's not acceptable. And if we want to live in this state and have this state continue to be successful, our K-12 school and using that curiosity spark in science to introduce people like myself that continue to tinker and play around with things and explore and innovate is critical. So I'm really happy to see you all here, spread the word, invest in your public schools. It is critical and it is a lifeline and an opportunity to improving future generations. Thank you.
And now is my great pleasure, personal pleasure, to introduce my good friend and this evening's moderator, UW-Madison Director of Media Relations and Strategic Communications, Kelly Tyrell, to tell you about tonight's session. Kelly.
Had the privilege of standing under the stars in the Southern Hemisphere with Dean Wolcott. So, speaking of memorable and science. Hi, everybody. Before I introduce our speakers, I just have a couple of housekeeping details. You don't want to hear the voice again. So she's asked me to do this. Our session tonight could go as late as 9 p.m. We're getting started a little late. I want to invite people to stay for as long or as short of a time as it suits you. But we'll be getting to audience questions as soon as possible. If you're in the room and have a question, there's a microphone here up at the front. And so we ask you to stand and at the microphone and ask your question when the time comes. We're also fielding questions from our online audience as well. So if you're participating via Zoom, please use the Q&A function in Zoom and not the chat. We'll have your questions read out loud. And we'll try to alternate online and in-person questions to make sure we get to as many as possible. So with that, I'd like to say a few words about this evening's speakers. I am a longtime listener of Radiolab, so I'm nerding out that we get to have Latif and Soren here tonight. When looking around the room, there are many, many of you. I don't know how many are online as well, but I suspect that many of you are also fans of Radiolab. Let's see, raise your hands. So clearly you are as excited as I am to have Latif Nasser, who is co-host of Radiolab, and executive editor Soren Wheeler here tonight in this room as part of the Wisconsin Science Festival. Latif is on campus this week as the UW-Madison Sharon Dunwoody Science Journalist in Residence, a program that started in 1986 and has brought a multitude of national science journalists to Madison, sometimes virtually. They're excited to be back in person this year, nearly every semester since then. It's hosted by my office, University Communications, and the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. knew I was gonna add that S there, it didn't belong. Soren, who is Latif's boss, was kind enough to agree to join him tonight. You'll learn more about Soren and his wife, Cassie Wheeler, who is an accomplished science writer and incoming president of the National Association of Science Writers, from Latif. So I'll spare you those details. But both Soren and Latif are here tonight for this crossroads of ideas to lift the veil on what goes into making a compelling radio show year after year. In preparing to introduce them tonight, I remembered I'd interviewed Radiolab co-founder Jad Abumrad in 2014. I can't believe how many years have passed. He swung through Madison for a talk, and I was able to chat with him. I asked him then how he would describe Radiolab, and this is what he told me. It's like This American Life meets Car Talk meets Science Friday that's filtered through David Lynch. No, I don't know if that's how you two would describe it today. I started listening to Radiolab back in the days when it was just Jad and his co-host Robert Kolwich, experimenting with sound and storytelling, having fun reaching audiences with science that wowed, inspired awe, and made you think. A lot has happened since then, and many listeners know that Radiolab has, in recent years, tackled more than just science, and it shows. Latif and Soren work with a really fantastic team to create a radio show and podcast that continues to draw me in, along with millions of others, most of you in this room, hopefully everybody in this room. So tonight I know they have a really excellent live talk for you. We're gonna hear first from Latif, and then he's gonna welcome Soren to join him on stage. After that, we'll get to audience questions. So without further ado, I'm gonna kick it over to you, Latif.
Thank you so much for having me here. It is a tremendous honor to be this season's Sharon Dunwoody Journalist in Residence. I've never actually been in residence anywhere before, especially somewhere where I don't live. I feel like I should notify the IRS. But honestly, so much gratitude to Kelly Tyrell, to Stacy Forster, to Laura Eisler, along with the rest of the Wisconsin Science Festival and Crossroads of Ideas team. Thank you as well to the entire UW-Madison for hosting me and giving me umbrellas randomly when it was raining, as well as to all of you for showing up tonight. I'm also disproportionately excited that a little later tonight I get to rope in a prior science journalist in residence. Oh wait, where are my slides? I didn't even start. Here we go. That I get to rope in a prior science journalist in residence who is actually in residence here in Madison. Not to mention a constant residence in my head. Soren Wheeler has been my editor at Radiolab for over a decade on dozens of stories covering a bewildering range of topics. Yet perplexingly, I don't think we've ever been on stage together before tonight. And the reporter-editor dynamic, at least for us, as you will hear, it's kind of the yes and the no, the thesis and the antithesis, the yin and the yang, matter and antimatter, baking soda and vinegar, vanilla ice cream and soy sauce. So bringing us together on this stage, who knows? Anything could happen. Now, whenever I do events like this, inferior ones, obviously, because they're without Soren, I get asked one question over and over again, no matter what the talk I'm giving is about, no matter who is asking the question, be it an experienced journalist or a middle schooler who's never heard a podcast before, the question I always get is, how do you get your story ideas? And actually the answer is surprisingly straightforward. So that's the end of the talk. Thank you very much for coming. Okay, but it turns out this question is my favorite question because the hunt for those story ideas, that's my favorite part of the job. The way I see it, being a journalist turns your whole life into a giant scavenger hunt. The thing you are scavenging for as a journalist are true stories, ones that other people will actually want to hear, but also ones that haven't already been written about widely, ideally ones that will make you think things you've never thought before, maybe feel things you've never felt before, ones that'll keep you up at night wondering about them. Now, if this sounds to you like a hard, even impossible task, an unfindable thing, well, you are not alone. Many excellent journalists even hate and dread this part of the process. Many people outside the field think it's just basically down to luck and serendipity. I think none of that is true. It is not that hard to find good stories, and luck is just a tiny part of it. So for the first segment of this evening, I'm going to answer this question: how do you get your story ideas? In probably a more rigorous way than anyone who has actually asked me would ever want me to answer. The talk is adapted from a two-part manifesto that I wrote for the website transom.org. So if there's anything you want to follow up on, you can just go there, it's all in print. But I'm going to tell you about how I approached the hunt, and as well as a few of my favorite story hunting tricks I picked up along the way. So let's do this. The approach. So a lot of journalists are cowed. They start looking for a story when they need one. They're on a tight deadline, assigned to cover a breaking news story, looking to find some tiny, fresh story nugget to differentiate themselves from everybody else who's covering the same thing. To me, this is the worst way to start looking for a story. You are stressed out, you're crunched for time, you're panicking because you know you're competing against some of the best story finders in the business, all scrutinizing the exact same thumbnail-sized scrap of story real estate. For some people, that kind of pressure is helpful. For me, it just feels like homework and it makes me want to give up. Instead, I find it more rewarding to clear my mind and maybe also my schedule for a bit and start from first principles. There are nearly 8 billion people in the world. Presume that on any given week, 1% of them have fascinating, dynamic, newsworthy things happening to them. 1%. And there are a lot of great story finding journalists out there on planet Earth. But do you think that the Washington Post or BuzzFeed or the BBC or really all the mainstream media outlets combined could possibly cover 80 million stories per week? No way. Impossible. Whenever I see a print copy of the New York Times with the phrase, all the news that's fit to print in the top left corner, I cannot help but laugh out loud. It is objectively absurd. Even more so when you realize that those 80 million stories per week, those are just alive people's stories. There are also dead people and animals and microbes and planets and laws and household appliances and pop songs and modes of transportation. They all have stories too. So begin your story hunt with a refreshing certainty that there are effectively an infinity of stories out there just waiting to be found and told. Hunting stories is not this. Hunting stories is this. And all you have to do is find one. Okay, the tricks. There is no one way to go about finding a story, but here are 10 concrete, easily doable tricks that have helped me find, if not entire stories, then at least the spark that will lead to one. go to lectures. That's easy, you're already basically out. I have always been happiest living on or near college campuses just like this one, because when you do, as you likely already know, you constantly see signs posted everywhere about random lectures all the time. As a grad student, I committed myself to attending one random talk a day on something I knew nothing about. I'd go to talks like race, gender, and IVF in Ecuador, or the history of double entry bookkeeping. A fair proportion of these talks, I just sit there clueless, understanding nothing. In a not insignificant number of cases, I'd fall asleep. This is actually that one in the blue, that's me. This is from me in grad school. But honestly, at most of these talks, I did stay awake. And I'd hear phrases, and stories, and ideas I'd never heard before, and I'd just write them down and I'd look them up later. Grist for the story mill. Now, when the pandemic started, I was super bummed because all these talks got canceled, or so I thought. I eventually realized, as all the people live streaming this no doubt did, that they hadn't been canceled at all. They had just gone online. And then I realized that now I could actually attend way more of these talks, regardless of geography and time zones, than I could ever have attended in person. And I could attend them at whatever time of day or night I wanted. I also realized I could attend them while, because I was muted and with the video up while I was doing the laundry or the dishes or responding to emails or whatever. If I wanted to leave early, I didn't have to get up and force everyone, in my row to get up and shove over to let me get out. Okay, so here's what I do. Well, once a month, I go to eventbrite.com. I'm sure there are many other such websites. I search the word lecture with a filter for free. And I actually did it before presenting here tonight. And I found that right now, literally at this very second, there are talks you can go to for free online about first-person experiences of endometriosis, how the University of Michigan was complicit in the US colonization of the Philippines, how AI is changing the travel industry. I even found that you can go to a talk at this very moment with another science podcasting host, my nemesis, Wendy Zuckerman, the host of the popular podcast Science Versus. She's actually my friend. It's a great podcast. And best of all, although admittedly you do have to pay for this lecture, there's a lecture on, right this for a second, titled Iridescent Light Lampshades by Frank Lloyd Wright. It's in the description, but for the life of me, I cannot imagine why they left the word lampshades off of the poster. I'll just pause for a minute here to let all the people online hit the exit button and click over to the lampshades talk. No judgment, I totally understand. So that brings me to my next tip, which didn't quite make it there in the font translation. Beeline for boring. So actually, honestly, who would go, much less pay to go, to a talk about lampshades that lasts an entire hour? I would. I actually would, just as I would recommend picking up books or watching documentaries or going to museums that you don't think you could possibly ever hear about. And here's why. It seems super boring, right? And that's what's going to dissuade all the other story hunters out there. But here's the twist. Make a game out of it. The object of the game is to find a way to convince yourself, in spite of your very strong reservations, that there is something meaningful and worth paying serious attention to about lampshades. Work hard to find a story or detail in there that'll make you care, that'll make you want to hear more. Use your reticence to your advantage. If you can convince yourself on a topic as seemingly sleep-inducing as lampshades, you can convince anyone. I had this experience with Anthony Lewis's book, Freedom for the Thought We Hate, a biography of the First Amendment. When I first picked it up, I figured like nothing could be more technical or legalistic or boring than the history of the freedom of speech. It's just people arguing about arguing, right? How would that possibly be narratively satisfying? Partway through the book, I found the story of a man named Oliver Sipple. Sipple was a bystander who one day he was walking along and he saw people congregated. They were there to see President Gerald Ford. He stands in line. The woman next to him in line takes a revolver out of her purse, aims it at the president. Oliver Sipple dives, saves the president from an assassin's bullet. In the media frenzy, in the aftermath, when everyone was rushing to see who was this guy who saved the president's life, Oliver Sipple's friend, the activist Harvey Milk, outed him as gay to the San Francisco Chronicle, ruining Sipple's relationship with his family, ultimately ruining his whole life, in saving the president's life, basically hostage his. I think it is one of the stories that I'm proudest of. And it came from a book that I expected to be a slog, but is now one of my favorites. Tip 3, Google Alerts. Set up Google Alerts, a lot of Google Alerts. Okay, who here has a Google Alert for their own name? Be honest. Okay. Oh, not that many. I'm surprised. Okay, so most people, that's what they think Google Alerts are for, just for Google themselves. And while they're not wrong, they can also be a powerful journalistic tool. So if you don't know what they are, Google Alerts are this little free function of Google where you can put in a term, could be a name, could be a phrase, and then it'll email you every time that term appears anywhere on the internet. Now, this can be extremely helpful for several reasons. Maybe you are interested in a general topic area, but you've never find the exactly right individual story to match. So for example, I'm interested in this weird quirk of the American criminal justice system called Alford pleas. And so anytime a criminal defendant uses an Alford plea in court and it gets mentioned online or in local news coverage or on a government website, I find out about it. Or maybe you're working on a story and you're trying to find a really timely news hook, a thing that is happening right now to convince your reader or listener, like, look how current this is. Maybe you put Google Alerts on key phrases of stories you've done in the past so you can see if anything new is afoot. My favorite way to use Google Alerts is to think up random juicy phrases that would lead to good stories. I think of them like little story lottery tickets that may one day pay off big. Here are a few examples. So if you have used these phrases on the internet, I probably know about it. The human equivalent of a chaos agent. Most startling of all, oh, the irony. A self-fulfilling prophecy. And my favorite, the holy grail of. I often read stuff that's like, this is the holy grail of vegan cheese. Will these ever lead to a story? I have no idea, but they're really fun. Next, use search terms tactically. Stories come from tension, conflict, drama. I'll let you read that. Those are fun. The dead Pakistani on my couch, in case you're curious, I think that was like a line from a TV show or a song or something. Just anyway. Okay. Okay. So one of the best ways to find stuff like tension, conflict, drama that you want in a story is to search for it specifically. So let's say I'm interested in a topic like archaeology. I'll search every database I can think of, combining archaeology with terms like lawsuit, scandal, controversy, raid, crisis, feud, fired, revoked. There are also ways to do this that aren't quite as ambulance chasey, but it still promise something interesting to pay attention to. The something affair, the something effect, the something incident, the something revolution, the something dilemma, the something problem, the something paradox. Sometimes I literally just search the topic I'm interested in, like archaeology, let's say, with words for the kind of thing I'm looking for. Bizarre, incredible, unusual, surprising, profound. I will be the first to admit this is really a dumb trick, but it works better than you would expect. What do I want to know? Okay, so a lot of tricks so far have been ways to get exposed to stories that aren't already in the newspaper, stories that aren't already being widely covered. But let's say you find a story that has gotten coverage, but you're still interested in it. What then? Well, what you gotta do is you gotta try to read everything about that subject that you can find. And then you have to suss out whether that story is already being done or overdone, and whether there's any room for you to add anything new on the subject. So this trick is kind of like a helpful mental game that you can play. Anytime I'm in that situation, or really anytime I read nonfiction, I imagine myself sitting at a giant table, and all around the table are all of the story's main characters, no matter whether they are alive or dead or willing to talk or speak English or are single-celled organisms or the president of the United States. I imagine if I could ask them any question I'd like about this story, what would I want to know? The questions could be technical, emotional, philosophical, whatever. But I force myself to try hard to articulate them. From there, I ask 3 questions about those questions. So 1, have those questions already been answered in existing coverage? 2, if not, do I think I can actually get answers to those questions? Are those answers even gettable? And 3, if they are, will those answers be interesting and satisfying? If you think the most interesting stuff is already being covered or is uncoverable, don't waste your time. But if not, do. I remember doing this exercise in the early stages for a story I did for Radiolab called Staff Retreat, about 2 scientists who discovered a medieval medical recipe, like a recipe for medicine, that seemed to work in the fight against antibiotic-resistant bacteria, modern antibiotic-resistant bacteria. The story had been covered very widely in National Geographic, in the BBC, in the Washington Post, so on and so on and so on. But none of those outlets had asked to me what was the most central question of all, which was, how the heck was it possible that a 1,000-year-old medicine could kill a superbug that only came into existence within the last few decades? And I felt like with that question about, germy time travel, I had something to add to the story, which is why I, and we, I'm pointing at Soren over there, decided to do it. Okay, so that was tip 5. We're now halfway through. Tip 6, sign up for niche email newsletters and or trade publications. I subscribe to a lot of newsletters, included in that list are some of the obvious ones, straight news roundups from places like Politico or Harper's or whatever. Also lists of new books coming out, updates from NGOs, museums, that kind of thing, personal newsletters from journalists I respect. But more important than that are newsletters I get in specific subject areas, usually meant for a tight circle of specialists. So for example, I get dispatches from like intellectual property law firms, or from cybersecurity institutes, or from a working group of historians of education, and so on. The more obscure, the better. The point is you're trying to notice stuff that experts are noticing before maybe, where in their respective fields they're paying attention to them, but maybe the wider world hasn't quite started to pay attention to that story yet. And a hard-won pro tip, if you are going to sign up for 1 million email newsletters, one that if I were smart, I would have anticipated, create another email account for your email newsletters, because if you don't, oh my God. This is me, obviously. Okay. Tip number 7, seek out top scholarly articles. So if you go to most scholarly or academic journal homepages, picking one at random here, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, they have this little widget in the corner that looks like this, like that. It tells you the top cited and top read articles. Sometimes it even lets you choose a time frame. It'll be like in the last year, the last 10 years of all time. A lot of smaller journals do this too. So go to a journal that has a title that intrigues you, and I guarantee you one thing on the list of top cited or top read articles will catch your interest and be about something you've never heard of. I just did this like at 2 a.m. last night a few times, and I found a bunch of cool stuff. Like, okay, here's some stuff I found. One of the most read papers in the Annals of Glaciology, which I'm sure many of you subscribe to, Platelet Ice, the Southern Ocean's Hidden Ice. I never heard of, I don't know if any of you heard of platelet ice. It turns out that underneath the ice off the coast of Antarctica is a whole other kind of ice. I looked it up and Encyclopedia Britannica calls it, quote, perhaps the most exotic form of sea ice. Something else I found yesterday. Well, from the Journal of the International African Institute, Dreams and Dream Spaces of West African Molecular Microbiology. What a title, right? It's basically the story of how faced with major access issues that prevented them from doing serious microbiological research. I'm quoting, quote, a handful of West African researchers have reimagined and reconstructed existing laboratories as a means to weave their own dreams. There was a paywall, so I couldn't get past it, but that was and then if you want a really zoomed out picture, you can look at a bunch of different sites that rank academic papers across fields. There we go. So like any of these ones, Nature Index, Annual Reviews, SSRN, Google Scholar, there's a paper, and they, you know, every year they'll come out with a thing like these are the top papers, whatever. There was one that was for a long time, it's been bumped up as of last night when I saw it, on SSRN's like all-time top papers list. And this paper, it's just every time I see the title, it makes me laugh. A Diamond is Forever and Other Fairy Tales, the relationship between wedding expenses and marriage. So smart, right? And it's like kind of, once you see the title, you can kind of guess that it's inversely proportional. Okay. Tip 8, start conversations with strangers. Strangers are a blessing. Be they plain seat neighbors, people behind you in line at the ATM or in the waiting room at the doctor's office. Ask these folks questions about their lives, their jobs, their kids. I'm particularly a sucker for hearing immigrant stories. One time I had a rideshare driver in Los Angeles who told me the spellbinding story of how he started, I swear, you can't even make this up, the first ever death metal band in Kabul, Afghanistan. Amazing story. You should also ask people what they've read recently, as well as the new breakthroughs happening in their field that may just change everything. About 5 years ago, I sat next to a pleasant stranger on a bus from New York to DC. Her name is Lynn Morgan. She's an anthropologist. I told her I find that field super fascinating and asked her to tell me about some of the most interesting folks working in the field today. She told me about a book. The book was called The Land of Open Graves by Jason DeLeon. That conversation was the seed for a story that took me and the rest of the Radiolab team a full year to report and produce, and ultimately became Radiolab's Border Trilogy. Tip 9, Wikipedia surf and chase the references. Wikipedia is my favorite procrastination tool. It was also one of the sources of inspiration for the structure of the TV show I made. I loved going on long Wikipedia jags, jumping from link to link to link, chasing references, the weirdest of the factoids. It's never not surprising. Bonus points, especially if you use the random article button on the side here. Also, I cannot help but mention a newish account that is my favorite account on all of Twitter called Depths of Wikipedia. I don't know if people know this. Oh, it's so good. It's created by an undergraduate at the University of Michigan, Annie Rowerda. I find it consistently inspired and inspiring. I'm just going to show you a few of her tweets from the last few weeks because they're just so good. Here's one about a 500-year-old clam named Ming. A weird thing that happens to hedgehogs after traumatic events. The fact that in 1999 you could log into any Hotmail account with the password A. Okay. Okay. Final tip. Make the call anyway. So a few years back, as part of a Radiolab staff challenge that Soren came up with, my colleague Annie McEwen and I were trying to find a story about bears. My mind immediately went here to polar grizzly hybrid bears, which you can also call grizzly bears, or you can also call roller bears. The story had actually, it had been covered a lot, including by David Attenborough, who you can see over there, is the one on the right of the two. And it was covered as an example of climate change driving two separate species together. And the resulting hybrid bears were seen as the pioneer individuals of a potential new, highly adapted species. Evolution in action. Annie and I both found this story very fascinating and figured we didn't really have anything to add to it. And we almost left it at that and moved on to another half-baked bear idea. But we figured, what the heck? Why not put in a cold call to Polar Bears International? We're pretty sure we knew what they were going to say, but we're like, why not? Let's just do it. The scientists there responded immediately, and what they told us shocked us. Turns out, a recent paper analyzing all the sightings, captures, and genetic materials of all of these hybrid bears had revealed that there were only 8 of them documented in the wild, and they were all related. And if you look at this chart, okay, so polar bears are white, grizzly bears are black, males are squares, and females are circles. So it turns out that all of the hybrid bears descended from a single polar bear mother named 10960, and she seemed to have mated with 2 different grizzly bears multiple times over about 10 years. And then one of her daughters over there, you can see X15718, she seems to have mated with both her father and then also, for lack of a better term, her stepfather over there. Seriously, this chart is like 3 seasons of an HBO series. Anyway, what had seemed to be a species-wide phenomenon was actually all the result of one female polar bear with, as scientist Alyssa McCall jokingly put it, strange taste in men. In addition, what we learned was that these hybrid bears were not climate-proof super bears. Instead, they were very poorly adapted, maladjusted to both grizzly and polar environments. Anyway, nobody else had reported about this paper before, and thanks mostly to dumb luck, we had the exclusive, all because we made the call anyway. Okay, so I hope by this point I have convinced you that stories, compelling, true stories, really are everywhere in the air, all around you, and that even with something so simple as an internet connection, you have the power to pluck them out of the air. But once you have plucked a few of these stories, and maybe even managed to convince yourself that they are incredible, world-changing stories, chances are, if you want to tell it in a broad way, you're going to need help. You probably need other people to help tinkerbell these stories into existence in a way that is compelling and aesthetically pleasing and fact-checked and readily accessible online and touted on social media and so on and so on. But out of all of those people, the person who you, or at least I, go to first is my editor. I think of him as the human equivalent of one of those pasta rolling boards, taking formless dough and turning it into actual discernible shapes. He certainly is a chaos agent in the editorial room, but we've developed a working relationship that really is the holy grail of what you look for in a creative partner. Whenever I start a story with him, I know it'll turn out great, and that inevitably becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Please welcome to the stage Soren Wheeler.
It was so charming. You are so charming. I feel like I'm worried about the second half. Hopefully our rapport will. No, but really, it was. It is the single question that we get every time we ever talk. That's true, and I'm glad you did this because my answer to that question is love it. Or do you find your stories? Love it. Stuff. Same answer.
Yeah, okay, so what we're gonna do next, so in a way, that was like phase one, this is phase two. And then phase three is sort of questions and answers, so get your questions ready, but like, okay, so let me start with you. So I show up to you with a story that is obviously the greatest story anyone's ever told. And what happens then?
Well, so, I mean, you framed this all as like having somebody to help you. I feel like when we're talking, you and I are talking about stories, that should be in a t-shirt and a baseball cap, so I'm at least.
Yeah.
You were talking about how you need me to help you Tinkerbell things into real life, and we should talk about that. But we will talk about that. But I think as you will know, 4 out of 6, 5 out of 7 times that you come to me, we're not Tinkerbelling anything, so I'm saying no.
Tinkerbell dies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is bound to happen if you show up with 1,000 flowers, my friend.
Right, that's fair, that's fair.
But I thought maybe just not, I don't want to derail you here, but like, I'm both nervous too, but also sort of want to talk about the no. Because I think there was a lot of yes there, and it was beautiful and energizing, and nobody has ever asked the question, why did your editor say no?
Right, that's true, no one has
So it's a
ever.
little bit of a danger to do that on stage, but I think there's real insight in the no. And
No, for you, no is an art form,
I guess so.
saying no. Well, here, to my ideas in particular, I feel like, yeah.
It's definitely I do like it sometimes. I mean, you give me so many opportunities, not because they're bad stories, but because there's so many others to choose from. I feel free to say no to something. But it
Still hurt every time.
I sort of bet it does, and I don't blame you. And I think actually, like, here's what I would say. So I want you to ask me, I want to talk a little bit about no, because I think if I say yes, then we move on and we tell the story. If I say no, you say why not.
That's true.
So no forces me to actually articulate what the hell we're doing here and why we're doing it.
Right.
There's a way in which if I'm saying no, I'm maybe complaining about something. And as I've learned from couples therapy, you gotta turn your complaints into longings. So what I'm really saying is what I long for.
Mm-hmm.
And what I long for is probably the best signal in terms of like, why are we up here? Why do we do this? Like, why would we bother telling a story? What are we trying to do to the person who's listening to the story? So if we can take a beat and talk no.
Oh yeah, let's
And then
talk.
we can, we'll move into yes.
So what drives you to no and what drives you to yes?
I mean, we could probably just break it down with some particular, because as there are a bunch of stories that you have brought to me that I have said.
Oh, you want to go specific? We can go specific.
We could, I mean, or we could start a little bit, like I could give you a broad sense of why I say no, and then we'll flesh it out with some specifics.
Okay.
I say no when I don't think a story, and this is of course in comparison to the other stories you've offered me or the other stories that the rest of my awesome team has offered me, so I have a lot of good choices. So only in comparison to those other good choices, I say no to.
Hedging not to hurt my feelings. Just go, just do it. Go.
I say no to a story when I don't think it's gonna wake anybody up and make them think. The thing I am most terrified of is preaching to the choir, intellectual masturbation, telling people things they already know, letting them feel good by nodding along with you, and ending up with everybody that listened to you thinking the same thing they thought before they started listening. So I will say no to a story that I don't think can shake people loose, make them think something different. And that means I need it to be a whole list of things that we could talk about as we go through this, but unexpected in some way, emotionally compelling, intellectually interesting. I mean, usually things like story, character, narrative, but most particularly visceral and experience-like. So I want to get as close as possible to something as I can, not be told about something, but actually experience it. So, but like, give me one that hurts.
Yeah, no, now that you bring up about specifics, like this is the perfect place, I think, to air my grievances. Okay, I'll give you specifics. Okay, so I pitched this story. This is probably like maybe 8 years ago or something.
Which one?
Okay, so there was this story I pitched about there's this guy. His name is Carlos Magdalena, and he's this guy. He's a Spanish guy, and he they call him the Plant Messiah because what he does is like.
That was the name of the pitch.
I think that was the name of the pitch.
I know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if there's like a species and they're like they have like like 3 seeds left of a little flower or something, like he's the guy that they give those 3 seeds to. He works at Kew Gardens, and it's like he just has a record of doing this, like bringing plants back right from the brink. And the story that I was particularly interested in is the way he did that for the world's tiniest water lily. And there was this amazing story that he told.
The second time you pitched it, after I said no, the first time, that's what it was called. So the first time you pitched it, was called the plant messiah, and the second time you pitched it, was called the world's tiniest.
Oh, world's tiniest water lily. Fair. Yeah,
We're switching it up. You're thinking
Yeah.
maybe you get me with the
yeah. Sometimes it's like I wait a few years and then I pitch it again to see if you remember. But yeah. So okay. And then there's this great story of how he was like he had just a few number of seeds for this water lily, and like he just keeps trying them one at a time, and he's like alters the humidity or the this thing or the that thing or the temperature, and like every time this thing will not grow from seed. It's like you're just feeling this species just like fall through his fingers. And then he's boiling a pot of spaghetti one day at home, and he has this insight that he's like, it's the craziest thing. What if I grow this water lily without any water? Which is like, it's like too dumb. But then it's like the last seed, and then it works. And now it's like, he like completely brought it back from the brink, and that crowd goes, well, that's the story that I wanted to tell. Please.
Totally gonna be on your side.
Yeah.
The whole rest of this way. This is why my earlier comments were not so much a caveat of niceness of like I have other story choices as much as a defense of why would I say,
Oh, that's fair.
why would that jerk
That's
say
fair.
no to that lovely
That's fair.
story?
That's fair.
Yeah, as much as I promised sort of, it's interesting to get into specifics, as much as I promised that the no was gonna have a deep insight. My no to that was just kind of which is like, it didn't, what did I actually say? Like, I mean, one of the things that happens with Radiolab stories, and I'm definitely just like time out, like this is a story I want to put on Radiolab, and there really are a lot of other good choices for me to say yes to. So like, one of the things I would look for is like, it's just gotta feel like it gets large, you know? Like really large.
Which is the tiniest water lily, how is it gonna get large?
I mean, you know, sometimes when I'm thinking through my own, I'm thinking like, oh, what could we possibly do to this story to get it large? And I think we could probably talk about some stories where we did exactly that.
Right.
But like,
That's true.
but this one I just thought, okay, a guy figured out it's nice, the growing a water lily outside of water. Be nice that somehow the moment he thought it up, the pasta moment was somehow a little bit more relevant to I don't know, it just didn't, you know, it just like, it didn't quite have all the elements.
Okay, I'm gonna let you off the hook here, I'm gonna let you off the hook.
Okay, no, but you know, like also,
Yeah.
we talked to him, you talked to
I
him,
did,
because my no's are always maybes, and I
Yeah.
always let you make some calls.
that's true.
And you talked to him, and he was a little bit hard to understand, and maybe the tape quality wasn't that good, and we went back and did it again. But there was also just some barriers in terms of like that feeling of like getting really close to that experience. And even if you get close to an experience like I'm boiling pasta when I finally think, oh, I can whatever. I don't know. I don't feel like it had the emotional, like that really shook me up. Or that really took, you know what I think about a lot is like, is that gonna take somebody who hates water lilies to make them like fair? Seriously, because I come from a place where it's like what we wanted to do is take people who hated science in high school. I want them. I want every story to go get the person who is least likely to listen to this thing. So if you know from the start, here's a story about water lilies. 3 seconds in, you better get the guy or the gal who just wants nothing to do with that.
Right.
And so I guess that's like a no comes out of like, can we do that for this one?
Fair. Okay, let's talk about, because sometimes I do convince him.
Most of
to
them.
change
Oh
his
my
mind.
God, most.
But okay, but let's talk about, I feel like the one we should
More
talk
than
about.
anybody else.
What?
And most of the time, and much more often.
Okay, but let's talk about I feel like the no that I was like a no for a good reason, and then I really did turn you on, was the other Latif series.
Oh yeah. Does everybody know about this? So like 5, like not quite science, but the 5 or 6 part series in which Latif well, I don't know why I'm doing your thing, but like, and probably everybody knows it here, but like, yes, a monumental journalistic effort
I mean,
over the course of 6 hours looking into the life of a Guantanamo detainee.
right, so I found out that a guy had my name, who was a detainee at Guantanamo Bay, and there was like very little, well, yeah, say why you said no.
Because the pitch was there's a guy in Guantanamo who has my same name.
That's,
I saw the tweet.
yeah, I saw a tweet about it.
Like, that's weird.
Yeah.
That's, and then I think you said, I'd like to write him a letter. And I said, okay, you can write him a letter. Right?
And then they all came back, return to sender, all the letters came back, return to sender.
Yeah. I mean, but then, so granted, like that's a little bit tongue in cheek. Like you were definitely like, I want to use this as a chance. You had more information about him. In fact, the fact was that he had been by this weird sort of trial that decides that he can be released. He had been cleared and then not released. And it was like the eve of the end of the Obama. So there was more to it in the original piece than that.
Right.
But honestly, what I mostly thought was like, okay, that's interesting, but there's no way we're gonna ever access this stuff. And also like,
The guy, because no one's ever
nobody's-
interviewed
right.
a Guantanamo detainee.
Right,
While
there's no
they're
way
in
we're
Guantanamo.
gonna suddenly get to it. Like the fact that he shared your name seemed like a quirk more than anything deeply interesting to me at the moment. I turned out to be wrong about that. But also I just felt like, okay, I have this thing about like, if you take like Guantanamo or something like a deeply important, there's almost something about important topics that repel me because they're important. As horrible as I feel about this is only things I say as a Radiolab editor. It's horrible, it makes me feel terrible as a person. But
Because you
because
came to a university and you're telling like a room full of professors that you hate homework, basically.
yes, but I have to because everybody else hates homework, and if you want me to talk to them on your behalf, you have to trust me.
That's fair.
You know, because you're not going to get, you can get a certain number of people to listen to your podcast if it's homework. You get a lot more if it's not. But Guantanamo just has an art. It's a horrible thing. You're going to mention it. I'm going to think this is going to be horrible. It's going to end up being horrible. And at the end, it was horrible. And I can't believe we did it. And I'm like, the whole way through. Yeah. They're not going to be able to turn out the cool thing about Guantanamo. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, it's very like now you can find
The shocking reason Guantanamo is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and I'm always looking for this story that has a little change over time. Like I thought this was going to be good and then it went terribly wrong. Oh, but it turns out it's not, like I want her to so I can feel different things because feelings are the lubrication that makes my brain. So like, I just thought, oh, well, we're not going to change anybody's mind about one.
So, yeah, what then changed your mind besides my badgering?
I mean, it was also
Years
like,
of badgering.
it was your years of report. I mean, like what changed my mind was like, you just started discovering these things along the way. One, the question of what he did or didn't do or his guilt or not, sort of separate from how horribly he treated that question, which felt like an important question. The Guantanamo treatment side became deeply interesting and complicated and hard to figure out, and hard for you to figure out. Two, the parallels between you and him went way beyond name, went way into an assessment of you and yourself and your lived experience as a Muslim in the Western world. Three, you find out things about Osama bin Laden you never knew, like he had a sunflower farm.
And a candy store.
You get this chilling insight into the moments after 9/11 in Afghanistan, and told by this like classic military voice. You get the guy who helped to build Guantanamo. I don't know how you got these people, but like you get
The guy who helped build Guantanamo was like, oh, I wish I had made that worse. I wish I had not successfully carried out that mission.
Yeah, you get the guy who built it, who's now saying, I wish I hadn't,
Yeah.
or I wish I'd screwed it up somehow.
Yeah.
And you get, so like you found so many things along the way. And I'm like, I was there with you and helping push and doing, but you just believed in it and I believed in you. And we do that sometimes. We go down a road just because.
Right.
So like my no's are always maybes. I mean, you know that.
Right.
Well, for you, like there's some people that just get them. Like if you're emailing me, if one of you is emailing me, it's just gonna be a no. I mean, unless it's a yes, but I'm not gonna be like, you should check that out and get back to this. Probably.
Okay, but okay, so let's move on from no land to yes land. So let's say I do bring you the greatest story ever told, and you're like, this is the greatest story ever told. So okay, then what happens then?
Dennis, well, so you mentioned Oliver Sickle.
Yeah.
Which you said was one of your faves, one of my faves. And it's a great pitch. But from that point forward, there's just a tremendous amount of work. And like, I don't know the things that you mentioned earlier about getting, like Oliver Sickle, he's dead.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I seem to like
You
stories
do
where there's no main
really like it.
character.
Yes, you're a history, you came from a history.
Yeah.
So yes, they try to get you out of the talking about dead people thing.
Yeah,
They're hard to get.
it's yeah, it's like an addiction for me. I like talking about dead people.
What happened? I mean, I guess I feel like you know as well as I do what happens next, but like you struggle to find emotionally relevant, intimate. You struggle to close the distance between yourself and the experience of the story. So we start
You as a listener, you're talking about.
well, you and I
as a
try to
maker.
close that distance on
Right.
behalf of the listeners.
Right,
So
right, right.
we go out to get whatever interviews we can, and we struggle to get those people to talk in direct as language as they can. We line up their language so that like it comes and hits you as emotionally, powerfully, and directly as possible. So like, and then you argue about do you tell this part of the story first or that part? You know, like it's hard to think back to Oliver Sickle and know exactly what kinds of decisions he made like that. But I remember arguments about exactly what to say in the moment when he stopped, when he sort of saved the president. Like at what point do you reveal like his homosexuality or something, let's say, like, and where do you do that to have the most sort of like, you know, it's interesting because it's like, it's a story about journalism and privacy and all that stuff. But for the first 4 minutes, it's this crazy, like gun pulling, like it's just
We got to tell, for those of you who haven't heard it, we got the first 4 minutes are told by the assassin, the
was
would-be
still alive.
assassin. Yeah, Sarah Jane Moore, who like, she went to prison for a very long time and then she got out. And so now she just sounds like the sweetest little old lady. And so she's telling this story about how she went to go see the president and then she pulled the gun
Yeah, if
out.
you imagine like the Radiolab,
Yeah.
the traditional Radiolab, like, hey, oh, no, my mic is working. Yeah, okay, great. So tell me about Saturday. And this old lady's talking to the letter and she's like, and then I pulled a pistol out of my.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what? I mean, the funny
It
thing
sounds
is,
like, feels like a Hitchcock movie because you're like, there's all this tension building up and like, what is this lady gonna do? And then
honestly, like, you know, so much of it becomes a pile of those kinds of things because the job at some point becomes to seduce the listener at literally every second. You know, never let them go, like second by second by second by second. And, you know, but the other thing I was thinking about with Oliver Sickle was like, you know, we had this, was it a letter written by his buddy at the end that we had the actor?
That's
read?
right. Yeah. It was like an oral history with a friend because Oliver Sickle, basically in his later years, he developed he became addicted to alcohol. I think he developed schizophrenia. He just was completely like, he was kind of a bit of a shut-in, and he had very few. It kind of left very few traces. We just had this one friend, and we managed to find a oral history, and the friend had died too, and we found an oral history that the friend had done, and then we got an actor to read the oral history of the friend, remembering the last days of Oliver Sickle.
You go to sort of extraordinary lengths to try to get close to.
Oh, so hard, yeah.
A sort of felt experience of whatever story you're telling. But it's interesting. I guess the point being largely that like you can start with what is like a straight up hell yeah, yes pitch and spend months on research, on reporting, on digging this, on arguing about that, on the production and the music and the, you know, like, and sometimes it doesn't get you, like, I think one of the, and this is sort of like a pitch that at least you shepherded and then we shared.
Yeah.
But maybe like one of the best all-time yeses right off the bat was the pitch that we got from Janelle.
Chris what's the Match Made in Marrow?
Match Made in Marrow is the eventual piece. The pitch is, if I could sum it up correctly, like, hi,
This was a listener email we got cold and it stunned us.
It was like, basically like, hello, she had leukemia, right? Was it?
She went to
was
a
right.
concert.
Right, she went to the concert, signed up for the Be the Match donor thing, just thinking, I want to do something with my life, do something good. And then she finds out she matches with someone and she gives the donation, finds out she saved this life, and then she's wondering who her.
She's wondering who it is, and then she finally finds out who it is, and it's this Christian magician.
She, by the way, is an atheist.
And she goes, and this Christian magician's like, hey, come see my show. And she's like, great. So she flies to see his show. And then it turns out his whole show is about how, like,
Her
basically how she
donation
saved his life.
And brought him back to Jesus.
And it's like the blood of Jesus.
And he
the
brings
blood of-
her on stage at the end of the show.
Yeah.
As some almost weird embodiment of Jesus there on, she's an atheist, by the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
But she also at the same time feels like the genetic match required for the donation meant that there was something about the two of them was deeply linked. And
Yeah.
she really wanted to honor the relationship and wanted to do this thing for him.
And he was actually a great magician. And we went to one of his
And a
shows.
sweet man.
Yeah,
And then they just had, like,
but they had this
completely-
kind of weird disconnect where Janelle was trying to figure out, like, how should I feel about this? And what do I think? So
Anyway, but that became a struggle. That one was really hard to do because of the talking to him, and we actually had Jim was the Christian magician. It's just fun to say.
Amazing.
But it became a real struggle for a lot of different reasons, and I would say like that one didn't become the story that I thought it could have become in some way because of like the way we interacted with Jim and what we ended up getting. But the funny thing about I think about that one is like we were talking about what are we up to? Like telling that story is in some way, and this was really the result of it, more about bone marrow than it is about a Christian magician. We did a deep dive explanation of a bone marrow transplant and the immune system and what it means to match an immune system. We did some of our strongest science explaining stuff.
That's true.
And the reason we were able to do it, the reason anybody listened to it, or if they did learned anything about bone marrow, was because of the Christian magician. The Christian magician is like what I'm looking for in any story that can get me to do the thing that I think, Which actually reminds me, so can I tell them about the first story you ever came to?
Sure. Yeah.
So this is 10, how long ago did you?
Long time ago. 2009. We were finding out.
You weren't working for the show yet. You were maybe still in grad school, and Ellen had introduced me to you. And all I knew is that you had walked into the office, and I liked the way you moved when you talk. Really, you pulling on your hair. I was just like, yes, I like this guy. And so you came. Maybe it wasn't the first thing you ever pitched, but you came to. We were working at the time about a lot of things about robots. And we did a thing about Furbies, and we had all this stuff. And you had come with a story about a 14th century. I don't know how. A Spanish king whose son was sick, basically gonna die, and he was supposed to do a certain number of prayers, and made a little robot monk that went around doing the prayers in a circle so you could get the right number of prayers to say something.
Right.
And I was like, that's pretty interesting. I had been looking at automated pooping ducks and the thing that plays chess, and I'm like, but that one's cool. It's got some gods, religion, and a monk, and so you came in and you brain dumped it to Jad and I. But admittedly I was still like, okay, I'm not sure about this one. And you gave the brain dump, and it's interesting because at this point in time you were sort of half historian, half reporter.
That's right. I was still in grad school at the time. Yeah.
And so it wasn't clear whether you were a source or a reporter, and I like that. I like that confusion because it's energizing. Anyway, whatever. So you tell the story, and it's very interesting, but I was sort of 50-50, and there was a monk, and it was a little robot monk, and there was a really well-told story about the king and the prince, and he's dying, and it's sad, it's all these things. And I remember Jad and I were actually started looking at each other well, I'm not really like this story. And then you were talking about the monk, and you're at some point you said, you know what it is? It's the perfect prayer. And I was like, what? You were like, well, the thing about the monk is it's doing it exactly right. It's mechanically, precisely, mathematically the right set of moves over and over and over again. There's no error. And I was like, all of a sudden, the difference between Catholicism and Protestantism, between the letter and the spirit, between the works and the, you know, like, and the idea of whether intent matters or action matters was boom into the room in this way that like unlocked what that story was really all about, even though it was so really about a robot in the room. And it was just that, and I don't know if you knew that that's what the story is about, or if the phrase just popped out, or if somebody else had said it and you heard it or whatever, but that phrase, that notion, that the idea that got tagged onto those specifics, that's what the water lily did. Like if you had told the water lily and then said, it's the perfect water lily, God knows what it would have been that you could have said, the perfect pasta or whatever. But like that was a transformational moment. Like this can really make people think about something in a new way.
I actually don't remember any of that.
I got it. Yeah, I got chilled just remember.
Well, okay,
That
I
was the
think
beginning of
maybe it's time we gear shift to phase 3, which is Q&A. If that, so we can stop sort of, yeah, we can open it up to things people actually want to hear about. Or people, and I think there might be people online too, unless they all are, you know, asking questions about lampshades now.
I don't think so, but I can hear you.
Okay, I can repeat.
Yeah, we can.
I'll repeat.
Okay, sounds good. So my name's Meryl, I'm a senior. I know about you because of the last time we did last year. And it's the role of Meryl when I went on it. And it's
Oh, wow.
yeah. My question is if you have actually
Yeah.
you talk to Latif Nasser in person, and in that time, like, were you talking to like, notice that we were either one of your heroes.
Yeah.
Not that he's like a hero per se, but
Right.
like your character is watching for so long.
Yeah.
Just wondering if there's any of that kind of was.
Yeah. Okay, wait, do you, I can answer, I can repeat the question. Do you want to repeat the question?
Oh, I thought you were.
Okay, I'll do it. Yeah. Oh, no, okay, so the question is, which is a beautiful question. So, about the series I did, the other Latif, Latif, and this man, this Guantanamo detainee. So he actually got out of Guantanamo. He's now in,
After the series.
after the series came out, he's now in Morocco, and I still have never heard his voice, actually.
He got out on your birthday.
He got out on my birthday, that's right. And he then said it was his new birthday. But yeah, but I've been kind of in talks, and it's like gone back and forth about trying to visit him, trying to do that sort of follow-up interview that I have been waiting so long to do. And I'm not going to say too much, but it is happening imminently. Yeah, I'm going to go. Whether the second part of that question was like, do I dread that or fear it, or what are the feelings I'm feeling about it? I think it's I'm excited. I'm also like there's sort of, I feel like there's two parts of me. There's one which is the kind of it's the journalistic part where I'm like, I have a lot of questions for you, dude. I have a lot of questions, and I kind of want to I want to approach him kind of as a journalist approaches a subject, which is to say politely and sort of with dignity, but also like I'm investigating here. And then there's another part of me that is like, this poor guy has gone through this ordeal. These interviews that I did, not just with him, but with other released Guantanamo detainees, those were the hardest interviews I've ever done in my whole career. These men, like what I'm kind of asking them to subject themselves to is like effectively equivalent to the torture that they underwent, to ask questions about their past. like it's really, really difficult stuff. And we've even like, we've had people come in to talk about like trauma-informed interview and journalism and all that kind of stuff, which is really, really powerful and I'm using. But anyway, to answer your question, yeah, I'm like, it's so tender. And I'm really, yeah, I'm just like trying to approach it as like gingerly as I possibly can, because I know that it is, yeah, there's like this guy was locked up for so long. He said that he doesn't, yeah, he doesn't want to talk to anybody else. He just wants to talk to me and to us. And he listened to the series, so I think that's a good thing. But yeah, I'm like already making a list of questions. The list is very, very long. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Let's see. Okay, cool. So, hey, I'm Ben. I'm a scientist on campus and really fascinated by team dynamics. So it looks like you two have a great working relationship, but I'm kind of just curious about Team Radiolab in general.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any principles that you follow or guidelines to balance creativity with actually getting work done? Or anything that you think is really unique about Radiolab too?
Yeah.
I mean, that, yeah, that is the most of it. That's all I think about. And that's most of the game, is giving people the space to create while also meeting deadlines, put it simply. I mean, like one solution is just have a large staff and have contingency plans and make sure that, that you are working on things that you can get done at the same time that you're working on things that really need deep exploration and mixing and matching. But I think actually, to answer your question in terms of a little bit more intimately, in terms of like working with someone else, and I'll just answer it as an editor, maybe you can offer a different perspective on it, is that I do find that I have to help my reporters and producers that they have to exist in different states of mind. Sometimes analytics, sometimes creative, sometimes moving toward a goal, sometimes very open. And oftentimes the things that make them stumble or that are hardest for them are when they can't move between one and the other. They can no longer get creative because they're in an analytic mode, or they can't get something done because they're in an open mode or whatever. So a lot of the work is about practicing, like about helping them see when do they need to, like, and it's about like, listen, you've been sitting in front of the computer with a screen and it's Pro Tools, and the Pro Tools are these lines and blocks, and I've been telling you things, and you've got a script, and you're, I'm like, all right, fine. Bounce it out, put it on your earbuds, and go walk around a tree in a circle. And like, or vice versa, like, no, you actually need, let's go on script together, because I need to get you down in the, like something like that. So there's a lot of those kinds of interactions. The team dynamic, I think, I don't know, maybe you have more, maybe you want to talk about like whether that same kind of thing functions. I mean, I think generally when we get together, we're just like, as a full team, we're going whole hog creative.
Yeah.
And trying to just sort of like outdo each other and in that way charm each other.
Yeah.
Or, like, we're truly, like it's largely a job of like, if you can make our happy little room excited or laughing or happy, then you're onto something. But yeah, and it's also a little bit like, I feel like you get to play much more of the creative game than you do have to come to me, and that's my job to be like, we don't have time for that one. We have to do, I mean,
It's true. It's true.
Like, yeah, that's frustrating and hard, but
We're all out of water balloons. So
he's better at doing that than I would be, and I'm probably better. I don't know if that answered.
Yeah, thanks.
We do have a question online. Can we go to the online question?
Hey.
My name is Jordan, science writer, science journalist. I think a lot about the timing of stories and how there's urgent breaking news stories, there are evergreen stories that could be shared at any time, but then something I think Radiolab does really well is telling stories that could theoretically be told any time, but when told at the right moment can take on new significance or have new or unique impact. Can you talk about how you know when is the right moment to share the right story? Or if there are times when you know that it is absolutely the wrong moment to share a certain story.
Yeah, that's great.
It's funny because the calendar, the release calendar is the thing. I feel like it's the first thing you think about in the morning and the last thing you think about before you go to bed kind of thing. Or maybe your kids, maybe, I don't know. Yeah, but we think about that a lot, and it's great with the show. So Radiolab is 20 years old. And a lot of those stories were made to be evergreen, were made to be sort of shelf-stable in a way. And then we bring them out, and we re-listen to them, and they do take on some sort of curious new resonances. And sometimes that is, sometimes that's really exciting. Like, and that's fun for us to get to play reruns basically, because like they don't feel like reruns. Because this story that you heard a few years ago, I mean, I hear it's a totally different story. You know what was weird is COVID was a real lesson, a very extreme version of that. Because suddenly, I mean, it came like, at least for me, all of a sudden it was like sort of didn't know anything going on, and then it was all this was affecting all of our lives. It was kind of for a while, and whatever the calendar at that point was like, I don't know. You know, actually, I do know what we had lined up, but I was sort of thinking like, you want a story about snail sex when you're getting locked in, and everybody's thinking about only one thing. Do you want Radiolab to go be the quirky whatever as kind of an escapism? Maybe, but it felt wrong. And actually, we had been planning a story called The Cataclysm Sentence. That's right. We've been planning it for a while, and it was all about like, what's in the wake of a cataclysm, what's in one sentence that you could leave on to the other, whatever, you get the idea, it dealt with cataclysm. And Jad actually initially was like, whoa, we can't. And then like, and this was really the lesson of COVID, is like things just changed. Like 3 days later, I was like, but maybe we can. Maybe it actually does feel right. And then like a couple of days later, it's like, yeah, we can't. Like, so like we were constantly reassessing that exact thing. It's not like that show only makes sense. It certainly didn't break news. It's kind of evergreen, but it was more resonant in one moment than maybe another, and maybe sort of not the right idea in the first few weeks of the pandemic, but maybe sort of exactly the right idea 2 weeks later. And so I don't think it's so much like, you said something, you phrased it somehow as like knowing the right story at the right moment. I mean, you just are in whatever moment, and that changes what you think the right story is. And then in some cases it's changing day by day. But like the other thing I think I'll mention is like a story that came closely on the heels of that one was one from our reporter producer, Amy Hewitt, which was about an octopus that gave birth to this was a deep sea octopus, and gave birth to eggs and sat on the eggs as octopuses do. And what happens with octopuses is they sit on the eggs and they're dying as they do so, and the eggs hatch in the moment the mother dies, and that is the sort of final act with the mother, and the babies emerge in the moment the mother has decimated her own body on behalf of her eggs.
It's not a metaphor or anything for anything.
Particular octopus did that for 5 years. She sat on those eggs, not eating, just fighting off crabs, protecting and tending the eggs for 5. And nobody had ever heard of any such long thing. Anyway, so Annie told this story, and in the midst of it, actually at the time, we were trying to like kind of put these stories together much faster. We were all working from home. She was actually talking to Jad, telling him the story as he was in his closet. And there's a moment at the end of the story where you can hear his kids who can't go to school because of COVID are freaking out and running around. He's like, shut up back there, or whatever. As she's telling the story about like this desperate last act of parenting and the need to nurture our eggs and the fact that we're all trapped in this with like, you know, like, and so like, that was obviously serendipitous. But you learn how to be tuned to whether that's happening and sort of put yourself in the right spot for the right moment. But that was one where I was just like, I felt like it. And then we were even like, Annie was like, oh, he got, the kids interrupted him, so I don't know if we're gonna, I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding? That's the best tape I've ever heard in this moment, you know, like. So it's also maybe just about looking for, once you're in a moment, regardless of the story you've already got, looking for ways that story could bend because of it just bends because of where your brain is at as you go to tell it.
We have a couple of online questions, if we could,
okay.
Is that okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. One from David Baffa, who asks, do you set out with a planned, yes, I'm from on high. Don't look, they won't find me. Do you set out to find a planned narrative structure for your stories, or do you let the story itself determine its narrative structure, or some mix?
Yeah.
both, but I think usually when, especially when we're kind of at the pitch stage, usually, not always, but the story has kind of run its course, and we sort of generally know what the answer is gonna, like what the end is gonna be, or it's like a trial and the end is imminent, or it's experiment and the end, there's a kind of a, like, and I think it was a question about the narrative structure in particular. Like, so the narrative, it has a beginning, middle, end, and we kind of know the end.
Or alternatively, you being a good pitcher, create a narrative for your pitch, because your pitch wants to have a narrative to be a good pitch. Whether that's actually the narrative of the story later down is another question.
Right.
But so it starts with a narrative.
Right, because stories keep going, because they never
I'm
end.
thinking then it starts, you give it some structure in your pitch, which is made to get it through and for me to say yes, and for us to do it. And then we start to do it, and then other things announce themselves. And so I think in terms of the question, it was sort of like, you start with a structure, you come in with a plan structure, and then you throw that plan out. And then you make another one and you throw that one out.
Right.
And I think you would agree, like, it's mostly just about iterations.
Yeah.
The more iterations you can do, the better your story is gonna be. So if I could keep doing iterations on every single story I've ever done, I would.
Yeah.
Because it will get better. But I mean, how many iterations do you think we do structure wise?
Oh, yeah.
On an average story?
Oh, structure?
Like, yeah, like if, I mean, on
Like real, like throw out a chapter.
or at least move
Move like.
move some structural
Yeah.
element.
Oh,
Like
we do a lot, like especially
5, 6 different,
Yeah, oh, yeah.
7 different
Yeah,
versions.
yeah.
So
I remember when I first started, it would be like, you would see a file, like a bounce of a chat, it would be like, chapter 2, V46 or something, and you'd be like, well, what? How is there 46 versions of this? The Radiolab likes drafts.
So yeah, I feel like the answer is sort of like you start with one, you have one in mind because that's the only way to walk into your working world and do something and believe in it, go forward, and then you just got to be ready to dump it, make another, dump it, make another, dump it. Right. More online.
Yeah, we do have one more online from an anonymous participant. In your hunt to find stories, could you tell us about a time where you were relieved to kill one that wasn't working?
Oh yeah, so many. It's weird because I mean they're like relationships, right? Like sometimes you like love them, but then sometimes you kind of feel a little bit like a hostage, kind of. And is this just me? Am I the only person? Yeah, there was one story that we did. Actually, we did it. We didn't kill it. We did it. And this was a story, I pitched it because it was like, it seemed like a funny, silly thing, which is that at the London Olympics in, what was it, like 2012 or something? Yeah, there was this kind of quirk of the badminton rules where certain teams realized it was in their best interest to lose certain matches so that they would get seeds in the future or whatever. So certain teams were trying to lose, and then it turned out, again, through a quirk of the tournament rules, sometimes teams that were trying to lose were faced off against other teams that were trying to lose. And so here you were at the Olympics, like one of these was like the prior gold medalist, playing like the weirdest, worst badminton you've ever, like you watch it, you're like, I could do better than that. And they were playing, and so first they were playing badminton against each other and trying to lose, and then the ref comes out and is like, I know you're trying to lose, like you'll get disqualified if you try to lose. So then they were trying to play a whole third iteration of badminton where it was like still trying to lose, but trying to look like you're trying to win at the same time. So it was like so it was a kind of a funny, silly thing. And there's footage of this online. Watch the match; it's so weird. But so we pitched this, and it was like I remember in the pitch meeting, like everyone was laughing. We were like, and then I was like, okay, I guess I'll do the report. Like, there's no like big idea here. It's just like this is like funny.
I love that get-go, and I'm a big idea. Like I mean, like you were sort of starting to hit at it. It was like suddenly this thing, like if you have one team trying to lose, that's a mess. And it's just like ruin. But if both teams are trying to lose, especially while trying to look like they're trying to win, that's suddenly once again athletically interesting. There could be an Olympics where like the teams have to come
Everybody's
together
trying
to
to
try to
lose.
lose while you're trying to look at
Right.
it. Like, and I like the inversion of that.
But so the tricky thing was I was reporting that story and then I went and I interviewed a whole bunch of all the different teams where people were trying to lose and including the like main match that I was interested in. And all those players got disqualified. And so talking to them, yeah, and they were like young women who were just basically doing what their coach was telling them to do, and then they got disqualified, and it was a huge, I mean, badminton in a lot of these, like, they were mostly East Asian countries, like, that's a really big deal. The Olympics obviously is a big deal. This was a huge humiliation and tragedy for these young women. And so it was just like funny joke, yeah, sorry. And then like I started interviewing them, and I was like, I'm interviewing you about the worst day of your life that you wish you could take back, and like you feel like it's going to be this black mark in your obituary. But it turned out actually one of the badminton players who I interviewed for that story, she went on in the next Olympics to win a gold medal. So she went from a black card to a gold medal, which is awesome. But it was this story that I was reporting it. And I was like kind of trapped in. I was like, here's this story. It was kind of funny. It didn't really have a big idea, but then, and like now it's not funny anymore because now it's like kind of tragic. And I feel really weird reporting this. But I think we kind of incorporated that into the story.
The thing that is the source of the tragedy is also a pretty deep question. Like, what's the ethics of that?
Right.
If a tournament is designed such that it's to your advantage to lose, and you're a competitor,
Right.
why you be disqualified for doing the thing that the sporting event has? It's like, why should they hold you? And the argument back is like, because athletics is some abstraction of the spirit of athleticism. I'm like, no, you created a game and you set up a tournament and they did their best within the boundary of the rule.
Right.
And you disqualified them. So like, I mean, in some sense, actually like the thing that was the source of the tragedy became also a very interesting and again, larger idea question, like what's the ethics of that situation? And I think that's what sort of saved it, along with the sort of like the fact that could be next to this kind of ludicrous joyousness.
Right.
Where we end up like imagining like what would football look like if two teams are trying to lose, you know?
The weightlifting, like we're pushing it.
Yeah, weightlifting for trying to win.
Marathon. Yes,
take as long as you can.
Hi, thank you both for this talk so far. My name is Annika. I'm a PhD student here, and I work in social sciences, human subjects. So throughout your phase 1 and phase 2, I was really curious about the ethics that you run up against in terms of telling people stories.
Yeah.
I know that in journalism you have a code of ethics around that, different than the academic one.
Right.
I don't know that much about it, to be honest. But I'm curious how you, in the hunt for stories and the development, you deal with voice and representation. Like, are there times when you've said no because of those human subjects and privacy and ethics or kind of things?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, but yes. Yes to all of your questions. And actually I feel like the ethical dimensions of journalism and the kind of journalism we do, I feel like it's actually changing right now. Like I feel like it's kind of in flux right now. Like a lot of the previously held rules are now kind of opening up, and everyone's kind of looking at them. And in part because of that, like trauma-informed journalism and that whole kind of movement, like everyone's like looking at the rules, being like, oh, what should be the rules here actually, and what ought we do, and what is the most ethical way to do this? Yeah, I'm trying to think of I was trying to think of one that I have the feeling of, sorry, the one that we have killed for the reasons, but I feel like the ones I can think of are mostly at like an early pitch stage when we're still talking about whether this did not like we started to create and build a story and we had already done the interview and then we decided no. That I don't have any clear specific memories of happening, but there are definitely ones at the story stage where it's like, I don't think it's worth us going to like, a woman I remember one about a woman, I think it was a daughter who lost mother. There was something about it was like, I don't think we should be going to that person, asking them to like do this for us on behalf of the way the story we had it was. So we'll make decisions like that.
so far they seem to be ahead of time. I'm trying to think if there's been one where we've gotten the interview and then decided to kill it. I do think that, I will say generally, Radiolab started, like 2 guys, quirky talk science, right? And we've gone into a lot of other stuff now, and the 2 guys talking quirky science doesn't have quite that same question at foot, not the way we were doing it. Not in terms of like sound designing some neurons in an fMRI study. And now like we're dealing with very deeply socio-cultural, personal, and we have screwed up by not, I don't know if we screwed up by not telling stories, or we just screwed up by like not dealing with it in the right way. And there are some like semi-famous examples of that to talk about. We could probably take a whole other hour for a conversation here, but I think Yellow Rain is clearly an example of that. I don't know that it was ethically wrong what we did with that tape. I don't think it was necessarily ethically wrong to play that. I think both of them knew what room they were walking in. I don't think even they might have necessarily complained about the tape going out to the world, but the way it was framed was clearly problematic. And that's something that we had to like stare hard at and look at and rethink.
Well, we do, I think, like for example, walking into this interview with that one time, a form of unconscious, formally like this is, this is not like abstract or academic thing. This is like a very it's like it's really tender, and it's like there's a lot of ethical questions there. I feel like we are in general as a show, and I think this is happening like more and more. It's like more approaching it as a kind of a partnership in telling someone's story, like these stories, the time these people are giving us to talk to us, the memories they're sharing with us. We are valuing them, and we're trying to approach it, I think, more like a partnership now, where it's not like an extractive thing. It's like it's much more a kind of a conversation about like I don't know. There's probably still some kind of a power differential, but less of a power.
Absolutely, yes. There never won't be. Yeah, I think the best thing that you can do is the sort of as much honesty up front as you can about how you intend to tell the story, what your purpose is in telling the story, how long you expect the story to be, how involved you expect their role, like just as much upfront as you can. And then because we are who we are, we can dedicate ourselves to like, this is not going to be a 4-minute piece where I use 3 words. Like I'm gonna like try to make you come to life. I'm gonna do the best I can to represent your experience. The places where the ethics get tricky is that what you can't do is give them editorial control over the product. And in certain cases, especially when things might be controversial, you can't go back, like because there are times in journalism when you are working in a very different power, when you are dealing with someone who has power, and you can't give them the chance to back away from a statement earlier made. Like you have to stick to what you have on the record so that you can reveal the truth. But it gets, in the case of talking about a mother who lost her daughter, obviously then like, what are you talking about here? Of course. But yeah, so the line becomes between honesty up front and maintaining editorial independence. And that is squishy, difficult, case by case. And yes, there are definitely times when I would walk away from the story because it's not worth it to impose that on someone.
Right. And it's like, I do especially feel just the last thing, which it's like sort of dynamic, it's changing. I feel like right now we're kind of opening all of that up
and our staff has been a lot more vocal and concerned about, about extractive journalism and like talking to people who deal with trauma, people talking with oral historians about how do you do deep representation and how do you do things from the perspective. So we do trainings that are based on that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
All right, we got 5 people in 6 minutes. Can we do it?
All right.
Quick questions, quick answers?
Come on.
Hi, my name is Scott, and I am curious if you, Latif, have ever brought a pitch to Soren that was initially rejected, and you had to go back to rework it, and it turned into a story that you were actually very proud of.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other one is probably.
That one was sort of like maybe not a pure rejection, but I don't think it'll work, maybe, and that one just like sort of developed over time. I'm trying to think if there was another one that was like, you never know, the water really will come back. They will come back, whether it's gonna win the day or not, I don't know.
And I gotta go look up a picture of a dual fall in love.
You heard it, email Radiolab is one of those.
Yeah. Him personally, yeah.
Let us ruminate and see, like, if we can think of one, will come back, but I can't think of one right now that got like an immediate rejection and then sort of a reformed and came back. We'll probably come up with it if we answer other questions.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, yeah, thanks.
So thanks so much. So I'm a grad student working in the biosciences, and one thing I really learned in my training is to not overinterpret our results. So, if I grow something in a dish, that doesn't necessarily apply to humans.
Yeah.
My question is, you guys as journalists have that kind of similar challenge. So just curious in the strategies of how you balance having a really meaningful, exciting story with not overinterpreting or over sensationalizing something.
We're professional overinterpreters. I think it's safe to say. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting line because there are some times when it's like we'll play the games where I don't know if it's over interpreting the results, but one over interpretation of these results is at least let that possibility into the room and then be but of course just sort of play the field of possible interpretation, but you're also putting a little shine on the one that you like. It seems to have the most to do with it. As long as that in your last joke, yeah. I think as long as it's possible that's true, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But putting a little extra juice into the one that you like, or that has the most poetry to it. As long, it is a balancing act. You don't want to make it seem like that is what you want. If there are possible truths out there. But as long as it's not over-interpreting the results, it just would be inaccurate at some point. And, you gotta not do that. I don't know what more to say about how we play that line.
Yeah.
I'm nervous.
Thank you very much for that.
Hi, how do you approach finding an angle on a topic or story that's been covered a lot?
Yeah. There's one trick. I had even more on my Mr. Manifesto, but there's one trick I call solving for X, and it's when you're there's a thing an SAT tutor I had once told me if you have one of those little 3D X times you're trying to one quick way to solve for X is just sub in extreme numbers and just see what happens. And so I sort of do that with stories. I'll just imagine extreme people. Okay, what if this thing happened to a baby or a 100-year-old or someone on death row or someone on a chef or this just take every story and almost have the novelist half of your brain imagine up the most ridiculous scenario, the one that would provide that trick angle, and then have the fact checker half of your brain be should that actually never happen? Does that ever happen? And then you find it and you're how does that actually happen? It really has truth is often stranger than fiction, and you'll find that thing and you're that's a nice neat trick if you find it.
I'll just say I think that approach is the hardest way to go through this business. Starting with a topic and trying to find a story that's going to make it come to life for a top-down thing is just you're going to brutalize yourself because you're looking for something specific. Everything that he said was about looking for whatever, right? Both the joy and the productivity of that process was about the freedom of where to look. And if you're I got to find something about, I don't know, whatever ecological system in Costa Rica, but I got to make it come to life. I got, and then you're just how do I make this? I don't know, just go look for the things, the details, the moments, the people, stories that feel rich and figure out what they're about. And your life will be much easier and more interesting. But I will say that if you want to stick to that way of doing things, what Latif was saying about putting the characters around the table and figuring out what question you want to ask to have the that's the way to do it. You read the New York Times article and you start training yourself to be there was a jump from that sentence to that sentence. He said something about this and then just like, what the hell was going on between those two words that this reporter didn't like, go to your sources and find the questions you have that those people that have already done it have an answer, and then go deep. But also don't take that approach.
We're actually at time, and I want to allow people to head home. It's 9 p.m. But you two come on up and ask the questions too.
Oh, okay, so we're going off mic and
You're going
ending the
off
thing,
mic,
but we'll be
yeah,
standing
yeah.
here, and if you happen to want a couple more people walk up the line.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. Yeah.